Welcome to Thought to Action, presented by the London Center for Policy Research, where we delve deeply into important issues, examine ideas, discuss solutions, and put our thoughts into action. I'm Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Shaffer. I'm the president of the London Center for Policy Research, and thank you for joining us today. We're available on all the social media. Please join us on Patreon. We do our Thought to Action. We often have interesting topics nominated for our Thought to Action podcasts. Please be sure and nominate those. And also join our Patreon so you can participate in our Ask Us Anything podcast, which gets rather rambunctious at times. So without further ado, I'm joined today by gubernatorial candidate Sergio de la Pena. Sergio de la Pena is a retired U.S. Army colonel with over 30 years of experience. He served in the Trump administration as the Assistant Undersecretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere affairs. So Sergio, welcome to Thought to Action, and thank you for being here today to go through and discuss some key issues.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's a great opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
So we're going to talk about two policy questions which are near and dear to my heart. One is green energy. So let's start with that. Recently, Australia suffered a catastrophic failure, and I'm just smiling because so much of what I believe the Green New Deal has to do with crony capitalism, the investment of technology, which doesn't benefit anybody. So in Australia, they lost 80% of their ability to generate wind power. And so the thing that happened was they had to bring back in fossil fuels. So that's my question. What is sustainable about sustainable energy when it can't be sustained on its own merits?
Well, that's exactly right. And so we do have clean energy alternatives. We do have nuclear that's been a proven technology, and the way that we now design nuclear reactors is significantly safer than when we started. And so you could very easily convert to nuclear energy. I don't know if you ever served in Germany. I did. Back when I was there, Germany was powered by nuclear reactors, and they had plenty of electricity, and it was relatively inexpensive. Today, they've gone to renewable energy, and it's not as renewable as one would like because it's significantly more expensive. If you look at, there's two cases that we have to look at. And the most recent one was in Texas. They had a very similar situation to what you had in Australia. If you look at the level of power that was being generated in the winter by those wind turbines, it was less than 3%.
Right.
And yet that 3% caused the outage that you had where many Texans froze to, well, I don't know if many, there were Texans that did freeze to death, and there were many that were left very uncomfortable. And you can just begin to imagine the cost to those businesses that had to suffer without electricity. And so I've seen that in Texas. I've gone through Texas when you get these cold snaps that freeze everything up. And so if you don't have that level of reliability, you're going to have a significant challenge as far as providing energy for your people.
Right. So France, as a nation, has figured out what you just mentioned regarding nuclear. They've gone nuclear big time. And I know despite the popular perception of nuclear being unsafe, it is indeed the safest producer of energy other than hydro. And, you know, you can't have hydro everywhere, but you can build a nuclear plant safely anywhere in the world. So we should probably talk some other day about the fact that other nations are actually helping the Middle East build nuclear power plants. I would argue if it's going to be done, we should be the ones doing it. My friend Bud McFarland and Mike Hewitt are working on a separate project we should talk about some other day regarding trying to reinvest in our nuclear industry. But with that said, nuclear should be the first thing we go to because turbines have to be produced using all sorts of exotic materials. It's a huge amount of investment for a very, like you point out regarding Texas and Australia, very little return. Also, along that same lines, solar is not ready for prime time because there's something called the sun that needs to be there for it to work, and it doesn't work half the time because it's dark. And the materials that you need to store it, batteries, you're talking about batteries the size of where we're at right now in Northern Virginia. You're talking about the batteries the size of Fairfax County that would have to be just for one city be established, which is not practical nor sustainable. So, what do you think is behind this extraordinary movement by certain political forces to push us into something that is unsafe, unreliable, and frankly, something that does not benefit the people of Virginia?
Well, I would argue that it makes us dependent on the rest of the world because we're supposed to pay an act of contrition for sins committed for the rest of the world, and they expect us to pick up the tab. So it's a hit on our economy because it ties into the socialist narrative that's now being promoted here in Virginia. We've
Right.
become the test bed of bad ideas
Yes.
for the rest of the country. And so if you look at other states that have tried this, California, I mentioned Texas, but California went through the same exact problem because they didn't have sufficient energy. And here in Virginia, we have access to natural gas as well. So between natural gas and nuclear, we can definitely establish a solid foundation for low cost energy. As technology develops and as things become easier and better, there's other different techniques that are now being experimented with, especially in the non-nuclear but fission realm
Right.
that are very promising. So technology down the road is going to improve the capability to produce low cost energy. But we have this fascination with wind and solar because it generates money for people that are in those businesses. And when you get the government subsidies to pay for it, and you've got politicians that are looking at one party rule, that's a very effective way of being able to subsidize these industries. And what it does is it destroys human creativity that has been the bulwark of how our country has grown so much and so fast.
Yeah, we should come back and talk about this in more detail because this is something that literally is near and dear to my heart since I have a degree in this, and I think we do not give sufficient focus to what we could and should do regarding environmentalism. Look, I'm all for clean air, no pollution, plastics. Nobody wants to address the fact that Coca-Cola is the largest producer of plastics that end up in the environment because apparently they gone woke and they don't care anymore. It's really strange to have this as an issue. But we could talk about this all day. Let's go to the next topic. I know we need to get to it. Is Second Amendment.
Yes.
Sergio, as you and I both know, Virginia, the state we're in right now, our Constitution, the Virginia Constitution, was the basis largely for the U.S. Constitution. One of those key elements is the Second Amendment regarding the right to bear arms. The founding fathers had no understanding of technology regarding what it would look like 200, 300 years in the future. So I would argue this is a God-given right that basically says you have the right of self-defense and the government cannot infringe, yet they do. There's a major case before the Supreme Court right now, which is going to hear arguments regarding New York and their prevention of individuals being allowed to essentially exercise that right. How do you see that playing out? And what are your thoughts regarding the recent activities of Virginia, of Governor Northam, to allow for local jurisdictions to essentially be allowed under the shade of law to infringe on your Second Amendment rights?
So this, again, gets to the whole heart of the issue of how do you create socialist policies that overwhelm our democracy? The Second Amendment is there for a reason, and it is to protect the others. But I think more importantly, it's also a way to look at the heart of the issue, which is private property.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have private property, you don't have any rights. And private property is something that you have to protect. And that weapon that you are allowed to have, the arms that allow you to protect that property, is also property. So it really gets to the heart of private property. And so in the Constitution, the founding fathers realized that the only way that you can do that is to give people the ability to protect themselves and also to protect the society against tyranny. And if you look at our state flag or our Commonwealth flag, you see the motto has a warning there to tyrants. And it's there because tyrants have a tendency to want to take control. And the way you take control over private citizens is you take away their means to protect themselves. So I think the higher importance of the Second Amendment is that I've been all over the world And I've seen what happens when you don't have the right to protect yourself. In Venezuela, I used to go shooting every Friday. It was a great experience. It was a warehouse of confiscated weapons because the military and the police would take weapons away from criminals, and they put them in a big warehouse, and we get a chance to shoot them. After Mr. Chavez came in, that warehouse grew by an order of magnitude because they started collecting everybody's weapons. And you do that for a reason. It's to make sure that, that the private citizen can protect themselves.
So that's very critical. And I think that's one of the points I often make regarding where I travel. I travel to New York often since London Center is home office there. And the places I most want to have a weapon, I'm prohibited from having a weapon, which is completely insane. The idea that our franchise, our suffrage is diminished in liberal bastions, which they've essentially exercised Mr. Chavez's vision of disarming private citizens. It's exactly. Quite frightening. So how do you see the Supreme Court looking at this? Do you have any thoughts on what you would like to see come out of the Supreme Court on this?
Well, one of the things that we have to look forward to is how the appointment of all of the judges that President Trump put out there that take more of a conservative view of the Constitution. We're going to see the impact of those decisions that he made to put those judges out there. So I feel more confident now that we're going to have a favorable ruling on the Second Amendment and a return to our constitutional rights that we had before, especially if it goes up to the Supreme Court. And typically, Second Amendment cases that go to the Supreme Court favorably in support of the Second Amendment. Just look at the Washington case. So that's a reality. But let me just make one anecdote about the importance of the Second Amendment. I always had, I still have, guests that come from other countries, and when we start talking about the importance of the Second Amendment, I take them outside and I have them look out of my front yard. And you've been there; that's where you pick up your milk. One of the things that I ask them is, notice the front yards here. I said, what is distinctly different between our front yards and any other place in the world? And they kind of look, and pretty soon they come to the realization there's no fences in our front yards. You know, there's no differentiation in property. You know where the property line is, and you respect it. And I would argue the reason that you have that is because people know it's not a good idea to be going into somebody's house uninvited at night.
Right. Because
we have a Second Amendment. And I've exercised that caution once when somebody was knocking at my door. It was a cop, but I didn't. When I heard the knocking at the door, I didn't know what it was, and so I went down. I took my gun and looked at the peephole and found out it was a cop. And so this is the reason that we are able to have a more safe environment, is because we have that Second Amendment right to self-defense.
Right. It's very important. I think people don't understand how the second is linked to the first, because the first is that which we must always preserve. So, well, Sergio, thank you for being with us today on Thought to Action. And full disclosure to the audience, Sergio and I both own a cow in Virginia. And so we are able to obtain raw milk, and Sergio is my dealer. Just full disclosure. So, just saying, I'm addicted to raw milk. I hate to admit it. So there you go. So
by the way, it's healthy. And if you want it, just get a hold of Tony and we can fix you up with getting a cow show.
That's right. So again, thank you for being here. Former Assistant Undersecretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Sergio de la Pena. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you all for watching and listening to Thought to Action. If you like our program and would like us to expand content, please join our Patreon community, patreon.com, Thought to Action, where you can preview Thought to Action before everybody else gets to see it, and you can participate in our very rambunctious Ask Us Anything events, one of which is going to be taped today. So we'll be having that out very soon. Please subscribe to all of the social media we're on, and thank you for joining us today on Thought to Action. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer and President of London Center. I'll see you again very soon.